and liberal John Dingell are suggesting that major health care reform is so important that it should first be taken to the voters in the form of a national referendum. What is your opinion of this? This was asked by Scott McFadden.
I don't read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, and I rarely believe anything I read on the page of the Wall Street Journal. So my view is that there are those who say we shouldn't do health care reform or we can't do health care reform, that we ought to go and have an election about it. I think there was an election about it. It was the 1992 presidential election. But if there are those who think we need another election about it, I think they are wrong. I think that despite what is obviously some bewilderment or confusion on the part of people about the details of health care reform, there is still a great expectation that health care reform will happen. And I think it would be a grave disservice on the part of the Congress not to deliver health care reform. I also believe it would be very difficult for opponents of health care reform to go to the November elections, because I don't think that this, at bottom, is a very complicated debate. I think that most Americans would understand very clearly if the health care reform message were posed in the following way. Why is it that members of Congress who have guaranteed health insurance paid for by your tax dollars through an employer mandate delivered by the federal government don't want you to have guaranteed health care insurance? I think that's very understandable in political terms. So I don't think there will have to be another election, but if there is, I don't have any doubt about the way it'll turn out, if that's what people want to have happen.
This next question, I think, is a good follow-on. It comes from Scott Engstrom of Franklin Templeton Funds. He asks, it seems clear that everyone on Capitol Hill is in favor of, quote, health care reform, unquote, and that if the administration wanted to compromise, some legislation could be passed very quickly. Is the danger of that approach, from your perspective, that you may be giving up a mandate at a specific period in history in which you may be able to effectuate radical change? Is it now or never for massive health care reform?
No, because what I think would happen if there is not health care reform this year, and if for whatever reason the Congress doesn't pass health care reform, I believe, and I may be totally off base about this, but I believe that by the year 2000 we will have a single payer system. I don't even think it's a close call politically. I think the momentum for a single payer system will sweep the country. And regardless of the referendum outcome in California, it will be such a huge popular issue, in the sense of populist issue, that even if it's not successful the first time, it will eventually be. So for those who think that building on the existing public-private system with an employer mandate is radical, I think they are extremely short-sighted. But that is their choice. There are many ways to compromise health care reform, and I don't think that the President could have been clearer in every public statement he has made that he has one bottom line. It is universal coverage by a date certain. And he has basically told the Congress, you know, you've got different ways of getting there, come to us and let's look at it. There are only 3 ways to get to universal coverage. You know, a lot of people stand up and applaud universal coverage, and they sit down and you say, well, how are you going to get there? And they don't want to confront that there are only 3 ways. You either have a general tax that is a single-payer approach that replaces existing private investment, or you have an employer mandate, or you have an individual mandate. And there isn't any other way to get to universal coverage. The market cannot deliver universal coverage in the foreseeable future. And any compromise that people try to suggest that would permit the market to have a few years to try to deliver universal coverage without a mandate that would take effect to actually finish the job will guarantee a single-payer health care system. So we are more than willing to compromise. We have said that over and over again. But there are those who, for their own political reasons, think no health care reform is better than having to vote for any kind of mandate, no matter what the combination of individual or employee or employer obligation is. And we just think you've got to have, at the end of the day, universal coverage. And so that's where we stand. But the route to get there and the combination of details that can go into the legislation are very wide open, and we're waiting to see what people come back with. It's very difficult to negotiate with people who stand up and say things like soft triggers, and you say, fine, bring us the legislative language, and then they take a walk on you because they can't figure out how to put it into legislative language. So those are some of the issues that we're confronting as we try to come up with what would be an effective compromise, so long as universal coverage is the bottom line.
The next question comes from Joe Higgins of Swiss Re Advisors, who asks, what is the likelihood that the tax deductibility of health care insurance premiums will be limited for corporations?
Well, what we proposed is that there be limits when health care reform was phased in. And we thought in our original legislation that that would be in about 10 years. And we think that that would be appropriate to cap contributions above the standard benefit package, whatever that is, at that time. But I don't think in the absence of comprehensive reform that gets to a standard benefits package, you will find political support for capping benefits at this point.
Next question comes from B. Cleathard from John Hancock Advisors. What role will tort reform play in healthcare reform? How important is it to the process?
Oh, I think it is important to the process, and we have recommended several policy changes that we think would help reform. One that I mentioned, coming up with clinical guidelines that would in effect hold doctors harmless if they were to follow those guidelines. We also would like to see more use of alternative dispute resolution and arbitration. We would like to see some mechanism for screening cases before they got into court, whether it be a certificate of merit or some other kind of qualification hurdle that he would have to overcome. And we would like to limit attorney's fees. The one piece that many people talk about, which we did not include in our legislation, was to cap non-economic damages. And we didn't for two reasons. One, because this really is the province of the states. I mean, unless you want to federalize the entire tort system, which is very difficult to get through the Congress, then that should be left to the states, and many states are acting on their own. There are all kinds of limits, whether it's the 250,000 limit in California or any other. And the second reason was because we viewed tort reform as an important part, but not as big a factor as many people have argued. We literally read every study done by doctors and lawyers and anybody else on the outside, and maybe on the outer limit, it might possibly have some impact on around 2% of the costs. And it is just it's a red herring to think you're going to eliminate the inefficiencies in our system by capping non-economic damages. So we do believe it's important, and we've laid out what we think would work.
This is the last question. This comes from Tom Gallagher to my right. Senator Moynihan has proposed substituting premium targets for the premium cap. Have you had a chance to study this, and do you have an opinion on it?
Again, I haven't seen any legislative language on it, so I don't know exactly what targets mean as opposed to caps or how targets would be enforced. But again, we don't rule anything out. I mean, if you have targets that actually are targets and not constantly moving targets, that seems like a, workable alternative if it can be structured correctly. But that's one of the things that the Finance Committee is working on right now, trying to actually put into legislative language these various ideas that have been discussed in their meetings thus far. But one of the biggest, two of the problems we have, one of which I referred to several times already, which is that it's difficult to react to proposals that are not put into legislative language, and you cannot then cost them out. And that is something that we're going to have to continue to work with members of Congress on, and we have a particular difficulty because everything has to be costed by the Congressional Budget Office, which is terribly overworked. So trying to get something in legislative language and get it costed takes more time than one would want. And the second big problem is the perpetuation of a lot of the myths that people seem to take as gospel about health care reform, which I'm sure that you run into. And one of the people who is here asked me to respond to this idea that doctors and patients would be thrown into jail if the doctor provided a service to a patient that wasn't in the benefits package or something like that. Apparently somebody's running for Lieutenant Governor of New York who's basing her campaign on that claim. And so I said I would respond to it before I left. The reality is, the myth is that individuals can't pay their doctors directly and that they will be sent to Sing Sing if they do. And the reality is, anybody who's actually read the bill, is that individuals can spend their own money for any medical service. There is nothing that prohibits that. And there is no limit on additional insurance. Individuals can spend as much as they want on any additional services that are in any additional insurance package that they wish to buy outside the benefits package. Now, what is forbidden is what is forbidden today, and that is lying to your insurance company about what it is that was done for you, so that if, under the benefits package, cosmetic surgery is not covered, and someone has cosmetic surgery but colludes with his doctor for the doctor to say that it was medically necessary and appropriate surgery under the benefits package, that is fraud. And just like it is today, that could subject the doctor and the patient to criminal penalties. And in fact, the penalties were raised in our legislation because there's a lot of evidence that there's a considerable amount of fraud in the existing system. But that is just one of the many myths that kind of gets a life of its own, which further confuses the picture, which makes your job more difficult trying to sort through information to make good investment decisions. But I believe that as we move through the next couple of months, people's attention will really become riveted on this. And because of that, the level of knowledge and information will go up dramatically. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, to talk with you about some of that information and to share it with you. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Well, we all thank the First Lady for sharing her conviction and her energy with us. Indeed, thank you very much.